Hello everybody, welcome to the Bronze Award Soldier Palmer fly. We're going to be using a size 12 standard wet fly hook. This is a medium wire hook. I think it's a fly box medium wet competition special, so it's quite strong but fairly lightweight, as it's fished, the pattern's fished in the upper layers of the water. We're going to be using a red thread. This is UTC at 8.0, and we want a foundation thread down to the start of the bend, and then remove the waste, and then come back in open turns. And we're going to be using red wool, and basically this is 3-ply, but the pattern on the guide suggests that you double up and tie that in. Well, I think that's going to be a bit too bulky. If it was 2-ply, then it would be fine. I want 4-ply, and this is 3, so what we're going to have to do is to split the strands and then put them together again. Easier said than done. So we're putting 4 strands together like that, and then we trim the ends so that when we tie them down on top of the shank, it's easy enough to pull through and then just bind everything down. And then if you give it a little bit of tension and then take your sewing thread over, it binds it all down and keeps it sort of nice and slim. And then finish at the start of the bend, and then at this point I'm going to cut it to length, so I want it just slightly short of the length of the shank. So I'm offering it up to where I'm going to cut, and then keeping a bit of pressure on the wool, pull it tight and then cut, and then it gives you quite a neat tail. And then the ribbing on this fly is gold wire. This is just Vineyard's size, oh, what size? Hasn't got a size, but it's quite fine. So we'll tie the gold wire, introduce it underneath the shank, about the length of the body, a couple of turns, making sure your thread is at the back of the hook where the tail is. And now we're ready to put the dubbing on, and the dubbing is seal's fur dubbing. An alternative synthetic will be okay, as long as it's not too soft. It wants to be a bit spiky to hold and trap the air, which seal's fur does very well. Now I just put a little bit of moisture on my fingers to aid with my dubbing. I'm just putting a little bit on. I'm not putting on a huge amount, and I'm not spinning it at this moment in time, just getting it onto the thread, because if you can then take a couple of turns to lock some of those fibres in, then as you wind with your fingers, you get this dubbing rope. And it wants to be, doesn't want to be too slim, but it, on the other hand, doesn't want to be overdressed, doesn't want to be too bulky. and just keep going down, touching turns, putting a little bit more on if you need be. And we want to be ending up about 2 to 3 mil back from the eye where we tie the hackles in. And we don't want to be too bulky at the head end, which will compromise the angle that the body hackles and the hen throat hackle or collar hackle produces. So taking all the fibres back and trapping them down, we can now introduce the hen hackle, the cock hackle, which I'm going to be using. It's a genetic cape. This is a gingery brown, sort of, I think it'll be certainly okay for this pattern. It's good because it's the length of the hackle is long enough to make, certainly on the larger sizes, turns down, open turns down. If you've got an Indian cape, they tend to be a little bit short. I've got an Indian cape feather here. I did have. There it is. So that's the length, the full length of the hackle, and the genetic cape. You've got on the right size, you've got 3 or 4 times the length. So I've got a prepared feather here, and it just happened to be the remnant of one I tied earlier. So I'm just going to pull a few fibres off so I can catch that in. And it wants to be good side facing you, and then tied in at the side, and then trap it. A little bit of beeswax will help. Just soften the beeswax between your fingers, and then get a little bit of wax on your thread. That will just help to hold the hackle stalk in, and 2 or 3 good tight turns, and with that extra little bit of wax, should be in there securely. And then hackle pliers, we're going to be taking open turns, and we're looking for about 4 to 5 turns of the body hackle. That's 3, oh no, that's 2, that's 3, that's 4, and that's 5. So holding that tight, we can then take the gold wire and then trap that in. Oh, it's pulled it off. And then I'm coming through in open even spirals in the same direction, because I'm going up the shank. That's going to trap the and reinforce the body hackle. So bring it through to the head, and then tie off 2 or 3 tight locking turns. Keep a bit of pressure on the thread and just twiddle that off, and then just draw everything back, making sure you've got as much rubbish pulled back as possible, and then a little bit of seal's fur there. So now we're going to be tying in the hen hackle, which is, I'm using this hen hackle, and because it's quite a good hen hackle, I'm going to be using a feather from about here, because I want about 1.5 to 2 turns, sorry, 1.5 to 2 times the size of the gape. And I've got, again, I've got a remnant here, similar thing with this, tied in by the stalk, good side facing you, and then a couple of turns, and then if you can take the stem quill back and then you can lock it off. If not, just use a bit of beeswax, fly ties wax, just to secure it, because we're going to be doubling it, which is going to put a little bit of pressure on, and then it's likely to pull out. So we're going to be, the good side is there, so I'm just going to be pulling the fibres back and taking a turn forward, sorry, yes, back from where you tied it in, forward from where you tied it in, beg pardon. So we're looking for 2 or 3 turns, pulling everything back as you go. Oh. So we got 1 turn, pull everything back, 2 turns, pull everything back, and I'm going to get 1 more turn in there, and then trap the fibres, trap the stalk, 2 or 3 turns to hold it off, and then you can just break it off and then pull any stray fibres forward, backwards rather, to clean the head up a little bit, and then taking a few turns up against the hackle rather than over it, so you don't squash anything down. You want to try and maintain that angle upright at about sort of 60, between 45 and 60 degrees. And of course, when it's pulled through the water, it will lay back, and then when it's pulled, stops, the hackles will return. It just gives it that little bit of movement. So once you've done your neat head, just the whip finish, and trim, and then just before we put the cement on, I'm just going to remove a few of those fibres. And I'm going to just use a little bit of UV. This is very thin UV, and it's ideal for tying the heads. But the only thing you must do is clear the head with I'm going to use a used hackle tip. Put the stalk in the eye and just pull it through. Just cleans the eye up, and then just a zap of UV. Cure it all off. I did notice a stray fibre there. There you go. There's just a couple of stray strands of the seal's fur. But, there you go, that's the soldier palmer. Just check that the ribbing and the palmering is even. It's not a difficult fly to tie, but it's a difficult fly to tie consistently. So I hope you have fun with that one, and see you next time.